Glad that everybody was able to come back, and we're going to jump into segment 2 of chapter 4, and we're going to talk about what is constitutes an effective follower. And just want to again everybody to remember that the authors of this textbook, they're academic, and they provide some context and some good ideas, and some ideas that I think definitely are worth trying to implement, at least on a trial basis as you go forward. But a lot of the concepts and a lot of the theory in the book, and it's not just this textbook, but most text on leadership that you see, and I hate to say it's a rehash, but it is let's call it a rebranding. It is a rebranding of concepts that you may have seen in the past if you've gone to some leadership seminars, and they're putting it out here. And again, academics, they're in a situation where it's like publish or perish. So they're trying to get journal articles written, trying to get textbooks written, and they find themselves, I don't want to say without any original thought, but they're putting their twist on some concepts that may have been around forever. And then so as you go through the textbook, and especially as you listen to me, again, don't take everything as the gospel, and don't assume it's the only way to manage, because there are a bazillion ways to be a good leader. And one of the things that I really like about the textbook is they continually go back to leader, follower, context. And I don't think you can ever emphasize context or situation, whichever terminology you want to use. I don't think you can ever overemphasize that too much. So they go into like 3 or 4 different things that make effective followers. And one of the first ones they talk about is they assume responsibility and accountability. And that's not only as a follower, but that's as a leader. If you want to be a leader, you've got to learn to assume responsibility and accountability. You don't want to, especially if you're going up the leadership ladder from maybe a follower to a supervisor to a manager to a director or VP, whatever different rungs on that ladder there are in the particular organizations you work for. You don't want to get caught pointing your finger at the next individual up that rung of the ladder. So you just need to accept responsibility and accountability. And I think if you're willing to do that, then you have the potential to go far as you climb that leadership ladder. You don't want to just meet the demands of the job. You want to, as I've talked about, setting goals. There's the meets, there's the exceeds, and there's the stretch goals. As an effective follower, you want to be up here in this exceeds and these stretch goals. Not only does it generate financial opportunities for you, either through promotions or maybe a bigger pay raise or a bigger bonus or the opportunity for stock options, as you hit that exceeds in the stretch goals, it points you out as one of those individuals that has the potential to be a great leader in the future. You want to serve relevant constituent groups. They talk about you need to be engaged and be a critical thinker and be an independent thinker, which to me that's pretty common sense, but they want to point it out. And you've got what they talk about, you've got external versus internal sense of accountability. And I think that's what really differentiates an effective follower. You've got the external, levels of accountability, again, meets, exceeds, stretch goals, but you've also got that internal responsibility. So, great followers, effective followers that turn out to be very effective leaders have got that internal sense of responsibility. It's not just the responsibility and accountability that's expected from the organization, but they have that internal sense, that personal sense that it brings out. And, again, as I talked about, and they get into a little in the book, don't shuffle the blame. You make a decision, you develop, you implement a strategy, you come back and you evaluate it, man, that just didn't hit the goal. And so, I'm not going to turn around and say, it's that guy's fault. It's my, direct supervisor, didn't help me. He gave me bad information. It needs to fall back on you as the follower or as a leader as you're climbing that corporate ladder. And again, it talks about not only don't shuffle blame, but don't upwardly delegate. Don't shift responsibility and accountability to your direct supervisor. Your direct supervisor doesn't have time. If your direct supervisor is the senior vice president, trust me, they don't have time to have you upwardly delegate. And it's excellent advice for climbing the corporate ladder. So I think the two things that on this responsibility and accountability, it's don't shuffle the blame and don't upwardly delegate, because that's like the kiss of death if you're trying to climb that corporate ladder. And then the second thing they talk about balanced service with the courage to challenge. And they talk about as a follower, and I think in the context of the book, they're almost, I don't want to say, they are not associating followers with just independent contributors. I think followers are anybody within that organization that flows either up or down. And it's a tightrope for any of us. I've worked as a director, worked as a vice president, and even in those positions, I'm always following somebody above me as a direct supervisor. And it's a tightrope because you want to do what you think is in the best interest of the organization, but you also want to challenge the status quo, versus, you don't want to just be as they went back to the brown noser. You don't want to just be a follower. You want to challenge the status quo, and you want to challenge that status quo with information and with options and with probabilities and communicating, and the ability to communicate your ideas as you move up the corporate ladder. And one thing that I've always found that has served me well is when I'm on this tightrope and trying to get my direct supervisor to accept a new ideas, is I plot it out, and it's almost like a decision tree, but I'll have maybe 4 or 5 options. And with these 4 or 5 options, there will be some financial information that goes with the options. And with each option, I try to assign a probability. So, option 1 may be this, and it's got a, financial result of X number of dollars, and it's got a 60% probability of occurring. And you kind of match options. So you're matching information to options, and options you're matching to probabilities. And it's easy at that point to go in and sit down with your direct supervisor and say, hey, here's what I see as the problem. Here's where we're not as efficient as we could be. Here's the information that I think backs it up. And here's some options that I've laid out for you. And you walk that individual through the options. And usually, and even if they don't agree with you and don't want to implement your strategy, they view it positively, because you've gone to the effort to quantify what you think your strategy would be. So you're not just shooting from the hip. Here are the options, here's the information, here's some probabilities, and they are appreciative of that. And what I've found is if they don't agree with you, that 9 times out of 10, somewhere down the road, you're going to get a phone call and they're going to say, hey, you remember when you came in and we talked about, those options and the return on the investment and, what the probability was? Can you revise that and, and bring it back to my attention, and let's set some time up for next week and let's sit down and walk through that again, because I think it may work now. So that's where you find yourself as you're walking that tightrope. So, they talk about when you're balancing service and challenge, and even though I've never been in the military, my son was, and I think he would agree with me, is, the military protocol is challenge as long as it's an open issue. But once a decision's been made, it's like you can disagree, but you commit. And that's kind of the military approach. And I think a lot of the leaders I've worked with in the past take that, even though they weren't in the military, they still take that approach. It's like, I understand why you're challenging the decision. It's and sometimes it comes down from corporate. Sometimes it comes from senior management, and there's not a thing you can do. And your direct supervisor will say, I understand what you're talking about, and I like the way you've laid it out, but here's the organizational goal, and here's what senior management wants. And until we hear otherwise, we just have to move with it. And then the third thing they talk about is supporting organizational goals, and that's where this kind of ties in, and directives are having the courage to leave. And that is an issue with some individuals. They are so focused on what they think should be done, and it gets them so worked up that they leave. And yeah, I've seen it go two ways. I've seen it result in they just become one of those alienated followers, or they leave the organization. You don't want to be an obstructionist. They're just, you can be, loyalty extends to the organization. The organization pays your salary, and your loyalty should extend to them. So I think that is where some individuals have a real dilemma. And I've seen it more so lately, especially newly minted individuals coming out of college programs. And I started seeing some changes in 2015, 2016, into 2017, where they came out of these college programs with a college degree, and they thought they were the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they had learned how to do this in a college course, and they expected everybody just to jump up and grab their ideas and go with it. I hired a group of individuals when I worked for HealthNet in Southern California, and we were getting individuals with MBAs, and the schools in Southern California, to justify the cost of the MBAs, they were telling these students that once you get out, they should, anybody you report to should just, they should know that you should set priorities and set strategies, and you should get a promotion every 6 months. And if you've been working there, once you're out of school, within a year, you should be making six figures. And they were doing that to justify the cost of these MBAs. And you found a lot of turnover, and at least I found a lot of turnover. Got to the point I just didn't want to even interview an MBA from the schools in Southern California, because individuals were so difficult to manage and so difficult to mentor and motivate. And they ended up usually leaving within, 6 to 9 months. They just used HealthNet as kind of a stepping stone to get them stamped employable, and then they went on to something that they thought would be greater. They throw out a couple of caveats to effective leadership. They talk about it, chapter 2 or 3, I can't remember which one they talk about, takes two to tango. So it works both ways. Effective followers and effective leaders. It takes working together for it to work. So again, while the book has been focusing on leadership and leadership traits and styles, now they're starting to talk about followers and leadership, and traits and styles. It does take two to tango to get it to work. And loyalty can only be taken so far, and that's where they get into the issue of whistleblowers. So whistleblowers, as they say, it's there to to eliminate the overexertion of power, but it's risky. It's a risky but necessary. And they talk about speaking truth to power and the squeaky wheel, and but it can be controversial and can be detrimental side effects if not handled properly. And typically, it's within company policy. Those of you that have worked out in the private sector or even worked in the public sector, there's typically a organizational policy, and here's an 800 phone number that if you have an issue, and it's usually with moral, unethical practices that, and it's not just your, that you may be your direct supervisor, but it could be somebody else within the organization that you find are doing things that are unethical and could ultimately hurt the organization. And I've worked at a couple of organizations where whistleblowers took that route, and typically it hadn't really impacted the organization. Once still, once, they both of them have, typically go to court, and but at the end of the day, it does tend to benefit the organization because they see the errors of their way, and they do tend to change. So whistleblowing is definitely an option. Again, it can be an extremely risky option, but it's definitely an option. And then they move into managing up, and it's closely aligned with buying and being an effective follower. It involves building a good working relationship with the leader while simultaneously getting one's needs met. And to a certain extent, I think that's a pretty fair definition of managing up. Companies typically have hierarchies to follow. So if you want something done, you typically go to your direct supervisor. Your direct supervisor goes to his or her direct supervisor. That one goes again up one more rung on the ladder. And that's typically the way things work when you're managing up. What I have found worked in the past in a couple of organizations is what, and for lack of a better term, I just call skip meetings. So if I'm a vice president, if I'm working as a vice president, I've got directors under me, and the directors have managers. I will have monthly meetings with the managers. So I will skip the directors, because if you're not sure that the directors are passing the information down to the managers, or the managers to the team, to the followers under them, you can have you can have these skip meetings. And I found them to be extremely beneficial, because sometimes information just gets lost in the shuffle. You used to play that game as a kid where you would be at the end of the line. I can't remember what the game is called, but you'd be at the end of the line and you'd whisper in somebody's ear. I guess they would give you a phrase, and you'd whisper in somebody's ear, they'd turn around and whisper it, and you'd go down the line. And then when it got to the very end, you'd compare the original phrase with what the individual at the very end of the line thought the phrase should be. So, and that sometimes happens in kind of this trickle down as information is passed along. So skip meetings, again, I found extremely beneficial. They don't get into, at least so far, they haven't gotten into it in the text. So hopefully maybe they'll move, forward with it again. But again, from my perspective, the individuals who wrote this text are probably academics, and I don't know how much actual management practice they have, but they've got some really good concepts, and it's just a matter of taking those concepts and working and fitting the concepts that they provide in the book to the situation or the context that you found yourself in. As you're managing up, there's a couple of things they talk about. Accepting feedback and direction and information that is provided to an individual pertaining to that person's behavior and performance. And I have had on multiple occasions individuals that, especially these younger individuals, the younger workforce, or maybe I don't want to say younger workforce, but let's say the less experienced workforce, especially coming out of a college degree program, or they've moved over from another market economy into healthcare, they may not be the most receptive to feedback. So Again, it depends on their attitude and their approach. They must be willing to listen and accept feedback from a leader. And you know, as an independent and critical thinker, sometimes they tend to devalue the feedback that you provide. They may even actually shut out advice. And you know, you provide advice, information, options. You know, once a decision is made, you know, you just need to implement it, and you just need to get them to understand that in certain situations, that's just the way it works. And I've even had individuals, when you know you provide feedback and direction, that they'll circumvent the hierarchy. They'll go, you know, I've had them go to not only my direct supervisor, but that direct supervisor's supervisor. So it's just you just have sometimes followers that just don't want to, and it doesn't matter how you approach them. That's just their style, and they can't. It's their style and personality, and it's extremely difficult for them to move from that. So, and then they talk about work with leaders, style, goal, and perspective. They talk about some leaders are just, you know, it is hard coded by the book. You know, here's the way we're going to do it, and I'm going to be just inflexible. And then I've had the other kind of guys that, you know, say, hey, I'd go in and, you know, I'd get an email on Friday night and they'd say, you know, by Monday morning, I need this information, and I need it, you know, I just need it, the information. I don't care how you get to it, just get me the information, and, you know, but I'll give you the weekend to do it. And that's, you know, kind of freewheeling, not a lot of direction. I've had, you know, direct supervisors that, you know, were quantity oriented. They were concerned, especially when you report to an actuary or a CFO. They're focused on return on investment, and they're focused on financials, and everything is, you know, quantified, and they love spreadsheets. And then I've had some that, you know, is more quality and service, and they were more concerned with not upsetting, you know, maybe you've got a healthcare network in a certain area, and they weren't concerned. They were concerned about upsetting the providers in that network, and it was more quality and service. And they were, when it comes to goals, really loosey-goosey on the goals. And it was hard to get, you know, definitive goals for them to approve definitive goals. So it's kind of quality service. And then you talk about, you know, being fairly treated. And if you go back and you look at all of these taken together, I think it's important as you move up that corporate ladder, don't move up and don't apply for promotion, don't apply for positions or accept promotions if you don't think that you're the right fit with a leader. And I've turned down multiple promotions or, you know, multiple assignments over the years because my leadership or my followership style or approach just didn't necessarily match with the leader that I would report to. So, and yeah, I've heard people say, well, you know, it's a great opportunity to move up the corporate ladder. You know, I'm going to take the position, you know, hopefully the leader won't be there forever and they'll move on up somewhere. But I don't know, that's a little risky, and it becomes personal choice. So, you know, myself, I've just always been somewhat concerned about, you know, is there a fit or is there not a fit? And if I'm, you know, if I thought there was, you know, 50, 50, 60, 40 chance of a fit, I'd take it. But if you're getting down below 50%, I think sometimes you're just better to walk away from it. And then they talk about especially fairly treated, and you see it with students a lot. Students think they're maybe not being fairly treated. You try as a professor to be at this fair and treat everybody the same. And for those of you, if you follow college football, there was an article, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago maybe. Duke was playing Clemson, and Duke, it was, you know, an upset, probably the greatest upset in maybe Duke's history on the football, on the gridiron. And the quarterback sent an email. I guess it went, whatever, the kids today talk about everything going viral. So the email went viral, and he asked his professor, said, hey, I know that I've got this assignment that's due at midnight tonight, but I just had a great game, and I'm probably not going to be able to get it done, and can you give me an extension? And I guess the professor sent him an email back and said, great game, exciting game. I watched it. I'm glad we won, but no, man, I can't give you an extension. You've got your teammates that work to get the assignment in on time. Why didn't you work just like they did to get the assignment in on time? So unfortunately, man, I can't do it. You're just going to have to you're going to have to take responsibility and assume the accountability. So I think that's a good example of, how to, you're trying to treat people fairly. And then, I think it's important to have a role model, the behavior you seek. So, praise, attitude goes both ways, style and behavior, by managing up. I don't know how much I agree with some of the concepts they outline there as role model and the behavior seek, but it does go both ways. And again, as you move up that corporate ladder, I think you look for people that might be a role model that you would really like to work with and learn from, and have somebody that can mentor you and motivate you and provide you the structure that turns you from an effective follower into a great leader. And lastly, they talk about managing sideways, and I think it's great practice for being a dynamic and effective leader. When peers or coworkers are able to lead, especially in a project, you give them some opportunities. Students get it, especially in an MBA program, or students, depending on the classes they're taking, may get opportunities to lead and integrate other students into an effective outcome of the project. To me, managing sideways is more along the lines of, you don't control resources, and it's an opportunity, managing sideways, to gain influence and control over resources that you don't directly control, but you're going to need to be successful in your workplace. So they didn't get into it here, but you talk about matrix organizations. I worked for United Health, and that was definitely a matrix organization. The position I had there, it was somewhat narrowly focused, and I had, I don't want to say the budget was monopoly money, but I had money within my budget that I would take, and I would, subcontract out to other leaders within United to secure resources I needed to do my job. And they had the same thing. So they were essentially, buying some services from me. I'm buying some services for them, and working as peers and managing sideways. We all worked together to achieve the goals that we wanted. And you also see this managing sideways if you decided, that they're called project management professionals. If you decide to go that route, you're going to have to be very good at managing sideways, because a lot of project management professionals will tell you that, when they are assigned a project and they're trying to pull resources from competing functional areas within an organization, it's like herding cats. You can't get everybody at the same place. So it really stresses you if you're in a situation like that, if you have an inability to manage sideways. And then we're going to kind of wrap that up with just one last little comment. Adam Smith, an economist, Scottish economist, and then Ricardo, I think he was an English economist. They were the ones that brought forth the idea of specialization. So you can work in an organization, and maybe specialization works well within that organization. And then as a leader, You can talk about it being, having a diversified team, but you can also talk about having a specialized team where you've got specialists that work, and I've referred to them in the past as SMEs, subject matter experts, and they are specialized into one. They do it extremely well. And so as you're putting teams together, sometimes it helps, especially managing sideways, if you've got some of these SMEs, because as you start to manage sideways, if you've got some SMEs that might help other functional areas, you'll find that there'll be some give and take in that managing sideways process. That's going to wrap us up on chapter 4. Next time we touch base, we'll jump into chapter 5. Talk to everybody soon. Thank you.